Dost thou hear the holy warhorn calling you to battle? Listen well then, for the tales of our knights will inspire and gird you to feats of great chivalry. The history of His Imperial Majesties most exquisitely royal knights of the households of the Kingdom of Middle Franqyia and rightfully attached appanges, dukedoms, counties, and hereditary estates begins, as it so often does, in the Age of Strife. The exact details are lost to us now, but it began when a lost world found records of a lost kingdom, one of virtue, chivalry, and appropriately structured fealties. Their records were incomplete, but that didn't really matter to them. At the top of society sits the nobility, themselves divided into the immemorial nobles and the ennobled families. The royal house of Paris is at the very top of these, with other houses rising and falling in influence depending on a complex weave of political intrigue and scheming. The House of Burgundy in particular is only questionably loyal to the royal house, but the last all-out conflict between them was far too bloody to be repeated again in full. Disputes between the houses are settled according to a poorly remembered system of challenges, customs, and honour rules. Each house seeks to prove that they are the most noble, no matter how much backstabbing they have to do to achieve it. If one lacks political nous, however, then one of the best ways to prove one's nobility is through the glory of single combat. Knights of the households of the Kingdom of Middle Franqyia will frequently seek to engage with opponents they deem worthy. The more challenging the better. This has led the knights to have a great respect for orcs, who also seem to respect this ideal, and the clashes between venerable knight suits and orc stompers are legendary. This tendency does, however, lead them to reject what would typically be considered sound military strategy, and entire noble families have been obliterated when they've lined up, one by one, to take on Chaos Warlord Titans in contests of metal. Worse still, the households of the Kingdoms of Middle Franqyia place considerable value on the appearances of their knights. To lose a combat is bad, but to let the paintwork be scratched is intolerable. For this reason, it's not uncommon for a knight of Middle Franqyia to quit the field entirely should their void shields go down. Better to preserve their polish, and thus their honour, than risk damaging the venerable suit. This has understandably led to other divisions of the Imperium's military feeling frustrated with the households of the Kingdom of Middle Franqyia. Their invasion of somewhere might be going well one moment, only for their super heavy support to suddenly quit the field without warning, and leave the rest of their forces floundering. As a result, many of the commanders in the sector will actually be reluctant to request aid from the knights of the household of the Kingdom of Middle Franqyia. This suits the kingdom just fine though. To them, the Emperor isn't really viewed as a god, and more of as a distant lord, one whose tithes must be met, but who is otherwise safe to ignore. As long as they keep receiving large quantities of polish and oil, the households of the Kingdom of Middle Franqyia are content to focus solely on their own internal politicking and occasional warring against orcs and peasants. Given their lack of zeal for the Imperium, you may wonder why they haven't been considered at risk from chaos corruption. The truth is that the Chaos Gods did once turn their gaze upon Franqyia, but didn't quite go as expected. During the darkness of the Age of Strife, Khorne looked upon the households, thinking their battles might make worthy offerings. But the knights' bizarre interpretations of chivalry made a mockery of true honour, and retreating to preserve their lacquer meant they rarely caused the carnage that Khorne was after. Tzeentch meanwhile saw their political machinations, but found them to be too rigid and predictable to actually be of any interest. Nurgle simply had little to offer the knights, and Slaanesh struggled to find obsessions they could tap into. Middle Franqyia was a deeply anti-hedonistic society, and what things they did take to extremes, things like honour and duty, were rarely done for the actual joy of it. Of course, we all know there doesn't need to be any actual sign of corruption for the Inquisition to take notice. Many loyal Imperial armies have been excommunicated, and worlds condemned to exterminatus, simply to satisfy a personal whim or vendetta of a given Inquisitor. In the case of the households of the Kingdom of Middle Franqyia, they have so far been just useful enough to avoid much reprisal for their polish preservation behaviour on the battlefield, while being detached enough from the wider Imperium to not really be noticed by many outside of their local sector. And so they continue in their ways, fighting Xenos, the local peasants, and each other, as they strive to prove which of the households is most noble. This army is a commission I've been slowly painting for a friend, to represent their homebrew faction, the Knights of the Households of the Kingdom of Middle Franqyia. It's been really fun working on them. Each knight has a different paint scheme inspired by the flag of a different duchy or province from medieval France, but they're also all united by having the royal colours on their left pauldron. It's been a good chance to practice using masking tape techniques, which I don't use very often, and experimenting with things like going over the edges of the tape with some clear medium to seal any gaps. This sort of work, but I definitely need more practice with it, especially when going over more detailed and curvy surfaces. Waterslide decals are also something I don't usually use very often, partly I think because I was so bad at getting them to look good when I was a teenager. Using proper decal softener and applying a layer of clear varnish over the top does wonders to smooth them out though, and makes them seem level with the surface. At least with most of them anyway. There were definitely some from one manufacturer that, no matter how many layers of softener and varnish I put over it, I struggled to get it to look as nice as I was hoping. Creating lore and backstory for my armies is one of my favourite parts of this hobby, and I love when I get to play a game with someone who's done the same. I feel like it makes everything seem that bit more dramatic, because they're not just bits of plastic anymore, they're characters we've created. Even outside of the tabletop, it's fun to share the stories we've created for our armies, just as humans have been sharing fictional stories with each other for as long as we've been able to. I hope you've enjoyed listening to the lore for His Imperial Majesty's most exquisitely royal knights of the households of the Kingdom of Middle Franqyia and rightfully attached dukedoms, appanges, counties, and other hereditary estates. And I hope you have a wonderful day.